Ready when you're Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another review. This is a review of the 2018 novel, just published last month, Sight by Jessie Greengrass, longlisted for the Women's Prize, and Eric has already put down his wager that it will win the Booker Prize. So, let me give you the scoop right now and give you some choices. You will make your decisions regardless of whatever menu I give you, but I didn't like this book. I started out really liking it, and by the end I didn't like it at all. So this is, I hope, going to be a fair review, and in this review I'm going to talk about why I am probably not this book's ideal reader, but it might be a book for you, but ultimately it will be a negative review. So I suggest, if you're planning on reading this book, don't start with my review. Start with Eric's. Eric has done a wonderful, exuberantly positive review, which is on BookTube. I'll put the link in my show notes. And I think the only other full-length review I could find on YouTube was from the Waterstones channel. And there's a vlog there, and it's very positive too. So I'll put those in the show notes. And I would suggest, unless you already know that you tend to react to books the way I do, or negative reviews don't bother you, don't watch me until after you've read it. Okay? So how's that for some self-promotion? Okay, so no, I didn't end up liking this book, and I was disappointed because I really wanted to bond with Eric on this book, but it's kind of another one of those antithetical bonding moments. Eric, are we good? So this novel started out really strong for me, and I quoted in my Friday Reads a couple weeks ago an extended passage. And because I know some of you don't follow Friday Reads or whatever, and maybe haven't heard it, and it's my favorite quote in the book, I'm going to paste it in here. If you watched it, you can just fast forward. I timed it. It's about 3 minutes and 40 seconds. So just fast forward that far and you don't have to listen to it again. But here's my favorite passage in the book. And this is about the protagonist's mother's illness and decline. He allowed practicality to stand in for compassion, and my nominal residence elsewhere acted as a boundary line, a point of principled separation, until one morning I arrived at the house to find her curled up on the bathroom floor, asleep, a child's steroidal plumpness at her elbows and her wrists. For weeks, since that part of her brain which governed spatial awareness had begun to fail, she had been unable to dress herself, her knickers having come to represent a geometrical puzzle that she couldn't solve. But now she had lost the ability to navigate from one room to another, becoming confused in doorways, turning herself in odd directions. Although she still recognized the house, although she said that nothing really looked any different to her, and although she still knew that, for example, the kitchen was on the left of the living room and the bathroom at the top of the stairs, when she tried to translate this knowledge into action, it confounded her. That mental construct which she had of the house we had lived in for the entirety of my life, the two of us echoing backwards through the sheltering closeness of its rooms, our arguments, our gestures of anger, and our reconciliations, our particular celebrations, and our daily grinding still present in the marks across the walls and floors, the ghost stains on the carpets, the wonky handle to the study door. This no longer bore any relation to the space through which she moved, the fact of it unparsable, even while her memory of it remained clear and detailed. Her body, too, had become strange to her, its shape no longer matching the map she had of it, so that her idea of where she was in space floundered and was unreliable, and any movement was a conscious effort of attention, a matter of watching, pushing her body about, as though it were mere mechanism, while elsewhere, on an empty plane, its mental analogue moved freely through a steady silence. The following day I packed up my room in the Elephant and Castle flat and moved home, stuffing my belongings into a hold-all and, when that was full, into plastic carrier bags. I took a taxi to the station, and then at last I found myself going in the same direction as everyone else. sat as the evening rush hour began in the corner of a commuter train on top of my unwieldy pile of things. Changing at Clapham Junction, one of my bags split, sending a cascade of jumbled paperbacks and underwear slithering down into the gap between the train and the platform to settle on the tracks. I stood in the crowd of homing workers, my dirty jeans and high tops squalid amongst the multitude of suits and brogues. The remaining bags slouched about my legs, and I watched the trains run again and again across my things. And if, afterwards, I was unable to see quite how deeply grief ran, if I felt I had no right to my unhappiness, then in part I think it was because I was ashamed that this last journey home was one that I had made not out of love, nor even from compassion, but only from expediency, because it was necessary, and because there was no one else to do it. So, yeah, I just found that really powerful. And the writing about the narrator's grief, she was about 22 maybe, or something like that, when her mother died. And as the novel opens, she's pregnant. And so motherhood is sort of the overarching theme of the book. She is remembering her mother, especially her mother's terminal illness and death, and also remembering her grandmother, who was a noted psychoanalyst. So motherhood and giving birth is the predominant theme. Now Jessie Greengrass overlays another theme which I considered overly intellectual and didn't really work for me, and that is where the title comes from, sight. Seeing what's underneath things, seeing through things. And so she interleaves historical narratives about the founder of the X-ray, the inventor of the motion picture, Freud, that was the worst one for me, no, and a couple brothers who did surgery. The first, they were the Hunter brothers maybe. I had totally lost interest by then, so that didn't stick in my brain, but the first cesarean section, that part didn't work for me at all. But that's not my main critique of the book. The good news is Jessie Greengrass is an immensely talented writer, and much of this prose just sings. It is really dense prose, but when she's actually telling a bit of a story, I think it's really effective, like the passage I just read. So, I love some of the writing here. I don't want to go on too long. I have several more quotes that I thought to sample, and I could sample many more passages, but I'm not. That one long quote will suffice for what I think works here. She also writes very movingly about pregnancy and about being ambivalent about pregnancy, about falling in love with her husband, Johannes. Actually, can't remember if they got married, but her partner, Johannes. But really, what she writes most powerfully about is grief. Those were the only parts that I found moving, were the passages about her grief, and those are lush. But she also makes really prescient observations about what it's like to be pregnant and her experience versus her partner Johannes' experience, and how she feels like the doctor and her partner were kind of laying claim to her body in a way that she wasn't necessarily ready for, and I thought that was all very intellectually interesting. I am perhaps not the ideal reader because I'm a bit of a genre policer. I don't know if I'm comfortable with the word policer, but those of you who think I'm out to lunch, that might be a word you might use for me. This is not a novel. So there's a pronouncement that I will make from where I sit. Many of you will disagree with me, and that's great. Let's have a discussion. But this is not a novel. This is an essay. It's a memoir, but really it's an essay. It's essayistic writing. So one of the things that ultimately I didn't like at all was that I didn't get a sense of any of these people as characters. There were no characters. There were only the narrator's essayistic musings and observations about the people. For example, Johannes? Who was he? He said a lot of nice things to her. That was it. Her mother? I felt really sad about her illness, but I didn't get any idea of what she was like as a person. Nothing. The only character I really... now, I will make an exception. The grandmother was a bit more fully realized. So, I'll give her that. But for me, a novel needs to have characters. It doesn't have to be a character-driven novel, but it does need characters, not just people to navel gaze about. Again, I'm not the ideal reader. I don't like personal essays. It's all me, 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 me. That's much too reductionist of a criticism to level at this book, but there were elements of this that I thought were overly navel-gazing, and I didn't like it all. But mainly just, I wanted to get a sense of these characters. It's very serious, dense writing. I thought overly intellectual, but with some really moving passages. Like I said, the historical narratives she includes, they left me cold. They were a little bit interesting, but I almost bailed at around 45% when we got pages and pages of Freud. Do we need any more Freud? Freud is done. Let's just pick a different person. I don't want to read anything more about Freud. Freud and God. We're finished. Move on, people. The other ones I wasn't so familiar with. They were a little bit more interesting, but I just thought, really, compared to the emotional themes that she was plumbing quite effectively, this intellectual transparency, X-ray, I can see my death. No, it didn't work for me. Work for, obviously, most people, I don't know most, the ratings are kind of going down on Goodreads for this, but the people that like it, they like that kind of thing. So great, it's an experimental piece of writing that didn't really work for me and may well work for you. I thought the prose was not consistently great, and the farther she got away from her family and her strong emotional reactions to things, the less satisfying the prose. Like, does everything have to be described so pretentiously? Here she is, and I remember this quote, but I was reminded of it when I read the Financial Times review, which was the published review that corresponded most closely to my reaction to this book. I'll put the link in the show notes. And he quotes this: they're going for a nice walk. I think it's she and her partner Johannes and maybe their kid. I actually don't remember, but Jessie Greengrass writes, "We became for the duration 3 independent figures amongst the trees, released from the thrall of that complicated set of forces which, inside the house, defined our paths." They just went for a walk. Okay? So a lot of overwriting, things that were very simple things that she tried to make sound very unique and ended up being quite pedantic writing. I think it's her second pregnancy. She gets a sonogram and she puts it on, I think, the bulletin board beside some postcard or something of a celestial image or something, outer space something. And this is her observations on that juxtaposition. And this just made my eyes roll. This was very close to the end. So in part, she says, ... the boundaries of my constructed world, the navigable realm of named things, and into that shadowy distance which was still unmade, which had neither colour nor warmth, but only spectrum, and could not be spoken of except through simile, to say it is like this other thing, and feel the point has not been made, and I could not incorporate them. They would be neither magnified nor reduced, and nor could they be imagined beyond these representations of them, which were themselves little more than metaphor. So that just reads like a lot of the academic crap that I had to read in grad school. That is not fiction for me. Just my opinion. Eric loved it. Please try it if you think that sounds like your thing. But to me it was a mixed bag, and ultimately I was hate reading it by the end, so this was a 2-star read for me. I hope for Eric's sake it wins the Booker, but if it does win the Booker, I won't be particularly happy, but I'll be happy for Eric. How's that for a peace offering? Have you read this book? What did you think of it? Thanks for watching.